Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. In recent months, we've seen Chinese hackers penetrate U.S. infrastructure and telecom systems. We've seen Iranian hackers penetrate manufacturing and transportation systems. And we've seen Russians access or breach a federal court filing system. It seems like some of the United States' most sensitive systems are under relentless attack, and foreign adversaries are essentially running rings around U.S. defenses. Now, joining us today to discuss these issues and discuss the challenges and how to address them is what I consider to be essentially the cybersecurity equivalent of SEAL Team 6. And I want to dive into this and get their views, starting with what's top of the news. So we know that very recently the National Security Agency and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency issued a rare joint advisory with 20 other countries warning that the notorious Chinese hacking outfit Salt Typhoon was continuing to inflict and penetrate U.S. and international infrastructure and telecom systems. Now, this kind of comes as a surprise to me in the sense that a year ago, my colleague in the cyber team, Maggie Miller, was writing about Salt Typhoon and the urgency in addressing it. And for some reason, Salt Typhoon and these other foreign adversaries who have the cyber techniques necessary for the job are continuing to do this. So I want to start by asking Assistant Secretary Harvilicz, what is it about these adversaries, about Salt Typhoon in particular? How and why is it able to continue to penetrate these systems despite our best efforts to prevent it?
Thank you for the question, and thank you all for being here, and thank you, Politico, for putting this on. And I think fundamentally, the nature of cybersecurity and offensive cybersecurity globally comes down to rules of engagement and whether or not a nation state is willing to do certain things and cross certain red lines. And if you're willing to do that, as China just showed, it has opened up a sort of a new era. So this pre-positioning inside our critical networks through Volt Typhoon, sort of as a landmark move by the CCP. And it's going to take a concerted effort across all of our allies, as you mentioned in your question, but also leadership here at home. And I think the fact that President Trump has assembled what is a veritable dream team in the two Seans, Sean Cairncross, Sean Planky coming in at CISA soon, hopefully, and then at NSC and at DHS with Nick Anderson and other folks. So this dream team of cyber leadership will put together the response that we need. And you're going to hear a lot about this coming up from these other folks on the panel that I'll let them talk about. But the rules of engagement have now changed dramatically. And we're going to be exploring Hunt Forward and other new advanced methodologies to address what they've done.
Thank you for that. So I want to jump on this idea. So we have an administration dream team that's attacking this issue. I'd love to dive down into specifics. Matt and Caitlin, what should that dream team be doing? What's in the toolbox? We've got China essentially opening up this Pandora's box, crossing the red line. Matt, you want to jump on this first?
Yeah, I think one of the first things we have to look at is to your opening. It's difficult to say that adversaries are eating our lunch as much as it is to acknowledge that there are certain owners and operators across the domestic U.S. footprint that don't recognize they're in a contested space. And so the first step we have to do is to manage that contested space as it truly is. So when you have a domain in conflict like this, cyber is a domain in conflict just like air, space, water, and the like, and we're just not putting that war posture or conflict posture in place in certain areas that we candidly rely on for day-to-day national critical functions. So the next steps is, one, you do have a heavy deterrence need. State actors, criminals, they know they can't go to Disneyland anymore, but they do need is something that makes them kind of question those conversations moving forward about strategic planning for the impact. whether that be all the levers of government or a direct cyber response. That also means our incident response for those types of things needs to increase and have heavier resilience options.
Thank you. Caitlin, do you want to drill down a bit in terms of what should this sort of war footing approach involve?
I agree with Matt. I think one of the things is first we need to acknowledge and expose the behavior, which was what was done a lot in that CISA and NSA joint advisory, exposing the poor behavior and the bad behavior. Second, as Matt said, there's a lot of companies around the country that don't realize that they are on the front lines. And even if we are alerting them to the risk, sometimes they don't know what they're supposed to do with that information. And there's a lot of information coming at them. So I think one of the things that I think would be beneficial is to really lay out the high priority and high impact controls and measures companies could take to address the risks that they're seeing from the Chinese nexus threat actors. Because there's a lot out there. And if you're a small business or you're a medium-sized business and you have a lot of information coming in, you may not know what steps you're supposed to take first. Or you may not be resourced to take all the steps at once. So really prioritizing where are the high impact controls that I can put in place to either disrupt the activity, detect the activity, or mitigate the risk. I think it's also really important that I'm going to talk about some things that my previous boss used to say about making it harder, costlier, and riskier for threat actors. Harder is we still need to close down on some of the lack of multi-factor authentication on endpoints, patching vulnerabilities in a timely manner. It's too easy for some of our adversaries to get in some places. Make it harder, make them have to work harder to get in and spend capital and resources to do it, and make it riskier so we detect them sooner, so that we can find that activity and expose it not only here in the US, but with our allies and partners.
Can I jump on that for a second? Because I'm all on industry needs to do more. But the other problem is the federal government has come up way short here. In the previous administrations, we had both Trump 45 and Biden. We didn't have near enough spending by the sector-based management agencies. So we haven't had a Secretary of Agriculture who's prioritized cybersecurity, but we have an adversary that does. We haven't had a Secretary of Homeland Health and Human Services that's prioritized cybersecurity, but the adversary has. Most of these agencies don't spend near enough. So I am excited, as Secretary Harvilicz said, for getting like Sean Cairncross in there, empowered as the National Cyber Director to force federal agencies. Department of Agriculture spent $250,000 on being a sector-based management agency. Around this room, we all know that's one FTE, that's one human being running a website. Secretary of Education did the same thing after saying he was going to prioritize it. So what I'll say, Phelim, is that they absolutely have to prioritize this inside the government as well if we're going to be a good partner. So I am excited in that regard for this new leadership coming in, having a fresh path to get funding.
Right.
And I'll just say, just quickly.
Fair criticism, sir?
Well, the old, in DC, I get throwing money at the problem it doesn't really work in cybersecurity. It's when you look at things like AI and post-quantum encryption, it's not something that we can just hire bodies to fill seats and throw money at. We need very sophisticated, very intelligent responses to that, and we need world-class executives to lead those responses, and that's what President Trump has put together with Sean Cairncross, Sean Planke, and the rest of the folks.
All right, I want to pick up on that point in terms of the tools necessary for the job. So lawmakers haven't been sitting on their hands in this regard. In 2019, they created the Cyberspace Security Commission, which essentially drilled down on this. 2 years later, came down with recommendations for cybersecurity focusing on close cooperation with allies and partners, denying benefits to the perpetrators, and punishing the perpetrators. Now, Mark, you were on that commission. 4 years later, have administrations not enacted those recommendations, or do we need to jump ahead to what you say is the need for a cyber force to address these full time, noting that Senator Angus King really attacked this just now?
So it's two different things. Senator King was the chairman, I was the executive director, and you can see you're about to see that we do disagree on things. We did agree on getting about 80 things done, of which about 60 have gotten done. There's been some regression at the end of the Biden administration and certainly at the beginning of the Trump administration, I think mostly due to DOGE, not due to the federal agencies. I think that recovery could, with good leadership, you could easily recover those things. But there's some work needed, and I'm not a fan of, as he is, and he is not a fan of Tulsi Gabbard cutting the CTIC and the Cyber Threat Intelligence Center at DNI and the Foreign Malign Influence Center. Both of those were unique, required, standalone capabilities that we absolutely need as a government to fight the Chinese and Russians who are going after us every day. Now, you asked about Cyberforce. That's a recommendation we came up with after the commission. I believe in it. This has much more to do. This is where Senator King says we don't need it because we have Cyber Command. And I love Senator King, but that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the military works. I'm a 35-year retired admiral. I know how the military works. We have something called force generation and force employment. Cyber Command is force employment. That's where you go kill things and break things, right? Force generation is how you build the men and women and the equipment to go break them. Our 4 military services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and now Guardian, Space Force, are doing a terrible job building cyber capacity. And that's because for every one of them, it's a high priority, number 13 or 14 out of 16 or 17. And when you're priority 13 out of 16, you don't get fed at the trough. So no service properly builds the cyber force that we need. Our cyber force today is 6,700 or on-net operators. It was 6,400 when we started it, a goal of 6,400 14 years ago. Who here is going to argue that the enemy's only grown 3%? In fact, the enemy on-net operators, the Chinese, we think have grown about 1,000%, while we grew 3%. I'm not sure 1,000% is right. I know 3% is wrong. It's wrong because the services won't generate forces, so you need a cyber force. By the way, FDD released a paper this morning at 6 a.m. on how to do a cyber force, so you can go read that.
Very timely. I just want to pick up on this. Assistant Secretary Harvilicz, Tulsi Gabbard couldn't be here today, but it's mentioned from Mark that she did cut certain agencies or elements of cyber defense. I just wonder, do you see that as problematic, or we didn't really need those things? It's a question of throwing money at stuff that wasn't being well spent.
I think Director Gabbard's been doing an amazing job. And I was at ODNI last week, and I can tell you that the people there are highly, highly skilled and competent, super smart, and I have total faith that we're going to work together to solve. This is a whole of government approach that we're using. There's a lot of inefficiencies, particularly in the cybersecurity space in the federal government, and we've been able to uncover those and unleash the real talent that was inside that wanted to do things. Now, I agree with some of the criticism about not building a cyber operative capacity. How many Chinese operators would you estimate?
I think there's 60,000. I think we have 6,000.
Did everybody hear that? China has 60,000 operators, and we have 6,000. That's, if you take one thing away, you should take that away from this. So what you're not going to see here is infighting in the Trump administration with respect to cybersecurity. You will not see infighting, personality issues. The heads of the federal response for cybersecurity and protecting the nation against cyber attacks, including Sean Cairncross, Sean Planke, the NSC, Alexei Anderson over at DHS. We are working hand in glove together, okay? And we're identifying where there's gaps, we're identifying where there's overlaps, and you'll be very pleased with the results, especially over at ODNI.
Great, thank you for that. I want to go back to, again, the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and one of its key recommendations was this idea of working closely with allies and partners. And what we know in terms of recent reporting, that members of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing group, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, have been apparently concerned about the Trump administration's sort of drift toward Russia and creating some concerns about the security, integrity of data that they may share. So I know that Matt and Caitlin, you guys have close contacts in government and in the private sector. I wonder whether you could speak to this in terms of what you've heard about these governments and these agencies' concerns about how it can or should be sharing information with the United States government at this particular time.
I'd say this, I have not heard anything from folks concerned about sharing information with the government because of any perceived change in approach to Russia. What I will say is, what I've heard from private sector is a lot of concern about the expiration of the Cyber Information Sharing Act of 2015, which expires on September 30th of this year, which provides liability protection, antitrust protection to businesses who share cyber threat indicators and defensive measures with the US government and amongst themselves. That's what I'm hearing more of, is the concern of that a law that's been in place for the last 10 years, which has really underpinned a lot of the sector-to-sector coordination, the private sector to government coordination and sharing of cyber threat indicators. There's a lot of concern if that goes away and is not reauthorized by midnight on the 30th, what that will do to private sector defenses, to information sharing writ large.
Right. Well, Matt, I'd like you to jump in on there, but also this mention of the fact that this important legislation is about to expire at the end of this month. It could create sort of a blackout for information sharing. Could you tell us what your concerns might be in terms of how that legislation might fare on the Hill and how this new legislation, this new form of the bill, how it addresses or improves the older one?
So what we're looking at is likely a kick the can approach on reauthorizing it for a short-term period. Candidly, that's good enough for me. I mean, we're looking at making sure the lights don't turn off. There was a goal that hopefully we would get a longer runway to try and take on some of those broader liability protection challenges, but turning the lights on is enough. And so what the current approach has is that if you have a operation and a cyber issue, you can share it with the federal government and you have a little bit of shelter there, so in a do no harm mindset. And that's necessary not just because of the United States, but to your international question. When it comes to the Five Eyes, that's the gold standard for international sensitive sharing. And what you have found across all of the large critical infrastructure, both globally and domestically, is that adversaries aren't coming from their home country to perform cyber attacks. The number one source for domestic cyber attacks is the United States infrastructure. They take over US infrastructure and use it to their benefit. So we actually have a petri dish of adversary activity on our own infrastructure trying to attack us that we really have to share with others, because when we go to the UK, that's the same conversation. They're like, it's actually coming from the UK infrastructure. And so it balances and bases around. But if you take a look at, for example, in my world, we have to take a look at like things on the internet that are kind of these honeypots out there that are just getting whacked just to see what's out there. A majority of them are from Five Eyes-based countries. And it's those types of attacks are not from Five Eyes operators. It's from the Big Four. It's from criminal actors. But that cadence, that battle rhythm, that reps that we get as an industry and as a government in battling these on our own turf has to be shared, because right now we still are in a posture of reactive. So we have to take one hit and make sure it doesn't get hit by another. So whether that's kind of the insert your bird of prey approach, eagle, falcon, what have you, when you see that beacon of light that something's popped, you have to be able to migrate over and make sure everybody knows about it so they can't use it twice. It also makes countering offensive cyber very expensive for that adversary. If you burn their tool, they can't use it again.
Right.
Hey, on the Russia, I just want to say, and I'm critical of the Trump administration, but this is a kind of a BS line that countries won't share with us for that. I mean, we had WikiLeaks and Snowden. I mean, if you weren't going to share with us, we already gave you the reason not to do it. This isn't fair to the Trump administration. I think what they're doing is some very limited intelligence around Ukraine is not being shared. I disagree with doing that, but that's the president's choice. But it's not fair to attribute to him at this point any collapse of the intelligence community sharing environment. We did enough damage over the last 10 years with leakers.
Fair enough.
And by the way, so Chairman Garbarino's version of the renewal passed out of committee unanimously, and we're very supportive of that. I was very proud to be there when it received that unanimous vote. And I thank you for what you said about that. I concur. And I'll just say this: when we asked our allies to consider, putting Huawei in their critical core 5G networks, we got a lot of pushback, and we didn't abandon our information sharing with them. And I think it's a non-starter issue. And
the best part about CISA 2015, Garbarino's reauthorization, is he renames it, I think, Wigwam. Because this CISA thing...
It's WIMWIG.
WIMWIG, whatever.
WIMWIG.
This CISA thing was crazy. Rand Paul could not get it out of his head and kept thinking it was the actual agency.
I think I think we have an opportunity here. I don't know anybody's going to name an agency WIMWIG.
Yeah,
so I think we have a win there.
Right. So focus, drilling down on China. So the Chinese government says repeatedly that U.S. accusations of Chinese cyber hacking, whatever, are groundless. And they add sort of this DARVO, deny attack, reverse victim offender angle by saying that the U.S. is the biggest offender in the cyber security, the cyber attack realm. They call the U.S. the biggest threat to China's cyber security. My question open question to the panel, is the U.S. accusing China and those foreign adversaries of basically the same things that the U.S. does in terms of cyber espionage, cyber spycraft? Or is there something fundamentally different about what China does and how it does it? Jump ball, Mark.
I'll go first. I say, look, we got to separate Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon. One is operational preparation of the battlefield. That's Volt Typhoon. That's putting stuff in so at a later date you can come back, either an access or malware, so you can go back, exploit it in wartime. The other is espionage. Salt Typhoon, which there was a lot of espionage in there. You can, on espionage, you can criticize somebody, but we each do it, and we acknowledge we do it. But on the operational preparation of the battlefield, we found them in are inherently public health and safety systems. There are in some other systems, too, that are more national security, like transportation. But they're in our public health and safety systems with malware and hooks, accesses to get back in later on. That's inappropriate. We have, when they have 60,000 offensive attackers, they don't have like the 1,000 lawyers you need to manage them. But our 6,000 offensive operators have about 100 lawyers to manage them, and they do a pretty good job making sure that we don't break, that we are not intentionally attacking civilian infrastructure. We assess our collateral damage very carefully. That is not what China is. They wantonly attack. So their espionage is okay. We can bitch about it, but we got to acknowledge it's okay. The operational preparation of the battlefield is warlike activity. And we have caught them doing it. FBI director put it out last year very clearly at a congressional hearing, and every agency's backed him up. They're doing operational preparation of the battlefield. We got to knock that off.
Right. Sir.
100 lawyers per operator. Show of hands, how many people know what a Uyghur is?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. This is Washington, I'm glad. And DHS just put out an alert on Uyghur imports from Uyghur concentration camps. When you walk in here, you see a protest outside, right? The big white tent, right? Freedom of speech, we have the Constitution. I don't think it's even appropriate to compare what America stands for compared to what the CCP is doing to their own people, promoting around the world. And so not only just, practically what Mark said about the numbers, the sheer numbers, and their willingness to go into ransomwaring hospitals. Okay, if you ransomware a hospital and they can't access their computers, children die. We don't come anywhere near that. And so it's not even in the same ballpark.
Right. I want to go even sort of deeper and darker in that regard. And I want to open this to the panel. We're in our last couple minutes here. But for a lot of Americans, this idea of the threat of cybersecurity threat and how China could or would use it in a conflict situation is pretty esoteric. I want to ask the panel, in your most concise terms, what would like a 0-day cyber attack, military-style cyber attack, designed to take down the United States, what would it look like and how bad could it be? Could you sketch it out in visceral terms? Caitlin.
So I am a former FEMA employee. I spent many years there, and I think of the communities after a Category 5 hurricane goes through and there's no running water, there's no electricity. You can't go to the store to get supplies. That's how I see it. It is a cyber. It's a cyber version of a hurricane, a Category 5 hurricane going through.
Fair
but
enough,
instead of a localized attack, localized impact zone, it could be nationwide.
Right.
This is where National Cyber Director is coming up next. He should be asked, there's something called continuity of the economy planning, which is how you do it. The Biden administration passed on this 2 or 3 times. How do you organize yourself for that worst day in cyberspace? We are not ready. We have FEMA for some of the spill on aisle 3, but we don't have a plan for how cybersecurity prioritizes the recovery of all your networks in a way driven by national security, economics, prosperity, and public health and safety.
I'll say
yes,
just real quick.
Sir. Yeah.
It's not pretty.
Yeah.
The last administration left us in a hole, but we are working day and night to make sure that we don't have to go through that.
And I think that's a good place to end. Thank you very much for being here and sharing this with us, everyone. Yeah, but give him a hand.